You sold the dirt. My brother, Sam spat, his voice sharp enough to cut the humid air between us. His eyes our father's eyes burned across the kitchen table. 200 years of family soil, gone because you couldn't stand to lose an argument. I didn't flinch. I just stared at the coffee, swirling in my cup, black and bitter, the way Dad used to take it. No, I said quietly. Because you all made it worthless. The silence that followed was thick with disbelief, rage, and something else, fear. Maybe. Fear that what I'd done couldn't be undone. Because it couldn't, the topsoil was gone. Trucked away in a convoy of rumbling, semis for a corporate landscaping deal that had paid me $2 million flat. The rest the bones of our land, the clay and dust underneath, was dead now. And so was whatever remained of the Carter family legacy. It hadn't always been like that. There was a time when our farm in Ashe County was the pride of the valley, 160 acres of chest-high corn and velvet green, soybeans bordered by the slow hum of cicadas and the gentle curve of the Blue Ridge foothills. My father, Thomas Carter, worked it like he was shaping his own soul with each harvest. And we, his children Sam, June, and me were raised in the dirt, barefoot, tanned, and blistered by summer. But when Dad died, the land turned into something else, something hungry. Something we started fighting over the moment the will was read. I remember that day as if the walls themselves had soaked up the tension. We gathered in the lawyer's office, the scent of paper and old wood hanging heavy. June was crying softly. Sam had his arms crossed, already coiled like a spring. I just wanted it over with. Mr. Carter, the lawyer began, adjusting his glasses. Your father has left the farmland to be shared equally among his 3 children. Equally, Sam barked. You mean divided? The lawyer hesitated. That's one interpretation. But your father's intent was clear. He wanted the 3 of you to manage it together. That was the moment I knew we were doomed. Dad might have been a good farmer, but he didn't understand people, least of all his own kids. Sam was a purist, the kind who treated the land like a living scripture. June wanted to sell her share, move to Raleigh, and never see a barn again. And me, I was stuck between them, torn between loyalty and exhaustion. I can't live on this land forever, June said through her tears. I have kids. I have bills. I can't farm. Sam slammed his fist on the table. Then lease your share to me. Don't sell it off to some developer. And what? Let you boss me around like Dad did. She snapped back. Their voices rose until the lawyer excused himself, muttering something about emotions running high. I stayed silent. Premier Louis. That was my curse, the quiet middle child, the peacemaker, except peace doesn't grow in poisoned soil. Over the next 2 years, the arguments multiplied like weeds. Sam tried to buy June out, but his crops had been ruined twice by floods. June threatened to sell her third to a company that wanted to build a solar farm. Sam Khaled betrayed survive me. I worked my day job in town and came home to their voicemails, accusations, ultimatums, guilt trips. Then one evening, I got a visit from a man named Howard Crane. Ewa Polit wore a cleans for the country, and a truck that cost more than the barn roof we never fixed. Mr. Carter, he said, stepping out with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, I represent Green Earth Land Restoration. We're purchasing quality topsoil for urban development projects. I believe your land has some of the best in the county. I blinked at him, unsure if I'd heard right. You, by dirt, he chuckled. We call it soil. And yes, premium soil, from older, farmlands especially, those untouched by chemicals fetches quite a price. 2 million, to be exact, for what's on the surface of your fields. I remember staring past him, out toward the horizon, where the sun was sinking into gold and rust. The fields looked eternal then, shimmering under that dying light. But eternity was a lie. I could see the cracks forming both in the ground and in us. I'd need signatures, I said finally. My siblings, we've already spoken to them, he said smoothly. Your brother refused. Your sister hesitated. But you seem pragmatic. That word hung in my chest like a stone. Pragmatic. I told him I'd think about it. But I didn't sleep that night. I walked the land under the stars, listening to the crickets and the rustle of old corn stalks. I could almost hear my father's voice, deep and tired. Take care of the land, boy. It'll take care of you. Except it hadn't, not since he left. The next morning, Sam showed up unannounced, mud on his boots, anger in his voice. "You've been talking to Crane," he demanded. I didn't answer. "Jesus, Eli, you'd sell the ground we were raised on." "I'm tired, Sam," I said. "Tired of the fighting, the debt, the ghosts. You want to save the farm, then buy me out. Otherwise, I'm done." He looked at me, then really looked at me, and something in his eyes broke. "You sound just like her," he whispered. Like June. Maybe he meant it as an insult, but maybe it was the truth. By the end of that month, I'd signed the papers. The truck team was enough, Tim growled, their headlights slicing through fog. Sam stood by the fence, watching, his face hollow. I didn't meet his eyes. I just listened to the sound of shovels biting into the earth, to the roar of engines. To the hollow wind, moving through what used to be our home, Army, I stood on the porch as they dug into the earth. Layer by layer, scooping away centuries of sweat and roots and memory. The smell of fresh soil filled the air like blood. Sam stood at the fence line, silent. June never came. When it was done, I felt nothing. No guilt, no relief, just a strange, hollow calm. I wired $1 million to June, another half to Sam. The rest I donated to a local food initiative Dad had once supported but never could afford to expand. Now the land lies bare, just clay and rock, stripped clean. Some nights, when the wind blows right, I swear I can still smell the earth that used to live here, and every time I do, I wonder if I sold my inheritance. Or buried. When I walked the land after the sale, the silence was different. It wasn't the kind of silence that comes after a storm or a fight, the temporary quiet that lets you believe peace has returned. This was emptier, a vacuum where even the birds seemed reluctant to sing. The air smelled like dust and diesel. My boots sank into clay that used to crumble, soft underfoot, alive with worms and roots. The hills had lost their color. I used to know the feel of that soil, how it clung to my fingers like it wanted to be held. Now, it was just dirt, dead weight. That night, I sat on the porch with a bottle of whiskey, Dad's old habit, one I'd sworn off years ago. The porch boards groaned under me like they disapproved. I watched the last truck leave, its taillights glowing red against the dark horizon until they disappeared completely. For the first time in months, no one was calling. No lawyers, no developers, no siblings screaming through the phone. Juste monde. The emptiness. But quiet doesn't mean peace. It just gives guilt, more room to breathe. A week later, Sam showed up again. His truck rattled down the gravel drive, stopping just shy of where the field used to start. He stepped out sloss heavy. He was happen bar, stained with sweat. For a long moment, he didn't say anything. He just stared at the land. You really did it. He finally said. His voice wasn't angry this time. It was tired. Hollow. Yeah, I answered. It's done. He kicked at the ground. A small puff of clay dust rose up and drifted away in the wind. You know, when Dad talked about passing this place down, he said he wanted us to build something together. Something that had outlasted him. I looked out at the stripped fields. We did, just not the way he meant. He let out a dry laugh. You always had a talent for killing the mood. We stood there a while, not talking. The wind carried the faint hum of the highway. Something you could never hear before, when the field still muffled the noise. Then Sam said something I didn't expect. I got an offer, he said. From a mining company. They're interested in what's under the clay. Gravel deposits. Said it's worth a fortune. I turned to him, half joking, half afraid. You planning to dig up what's left? He shrugged. Maitas. Well, can't grow anything on it now. You started the fire. I'm just fanning it. I didn't respond. He climbed back into his truck and drove off, leaving me choking in a cloud of dust. That night, I got a call from June. Her voice was small, brittle. Eli, she said, what have you done? I could hear the TV in the background, her kids laughing at something. It made the silence between us feel cruel. I did what I had to, I said. Sam called me. She continued. He said you're letting them destroy everything. The land, the memory, even Dad's name. I wanted to tell her she was wrong, that I'd donated part of the money, that I'd done something good out of all this. But the words felt fake in my throat, so I said nothing. Do you ever think about what he'd say? She asked softly. Ife? Could see this. I closed my eyes. Every damn day, she hung up without saying goodbye. In the following weeks, the land began to change again. Not with crops or life, but with machines. Sam had signed with the mining company. They brought in drills and diggers, the ground vibrating day and night. The sound carried for miles, echoing off the ridges like thunder. I've by sometimes just to see it they couldn't help me there. The fields that once held our father's sweat and laughter were now a wound in the earth. A pit. I stopped one afternoon at the old oak that stood at the edge of the property. It had been there longer than any of us, older than the farmhouse, older than our family, name carved in the barn beam. I touched the bark and felt its rough strength beneath my palm. Then I noticed the pink tape tied around it. They were planning to cut it down. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing Dad standing under that tree the day he told me the story of how his father planted it after the war. A reminder, he'd said, that roots can heal after fire, but roots can't grow without soil. The next morning, before sunrise, I drove back to the land. The machines were still parked there, silent, hulks in the mist. I grabbed an axe from the bed of my truck and walked to the oak. I don't know what I meant to do. Protect it, maybe, or take it down myself before they could. But when I stood before it, I froze. The sky was turning pink, and for a moment, the land looked almost beautiful again, even stripped bare. Then I saw movement in the distance. A figure walking toward me. It was Sam. He stopped a few yards away, his face unreadable. You here to make peace, or start another war? Neither. I said. Just came to say goodbye. He looked at the axe, then at me. You think that'll fix anything? No, I said. But maybe ting I can't. Lon on deep side. You always think too much, Eli, and you never think enough. For a second, I thought he might hit me. Instead, he just shook his head. I'll keep the tree, he said finally. For Dad, I nodded. Good. Then I turned and left. A week later, I sold the farmhouse, the last piece, packed what little I owned into my truck and drove west. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. But even now, months later, I still dream about that land, the smell of turned earth, the sound of the wind through corn. Sometimes I wake up thinking I can hear my father calling my name. His voice carried on the same wind that now sweeps over nothing but dust and stone. And every time I hear it, I remember the last thing he ever said to me before he died. Promise me you'll keep it alive. I did, Dad, just not the way you wanted. I settled in a small town to states over, the kind of place where no one knew my name. And the mountains looked familiar, enough to pretend they were home. I rented a cabin by a river that ran so clear you could see the stones glinting beneath the current. Most days, I sat on the porch with a thermos of coffee, pretending I was content. But pretending only works until the quiet turns on you. At first, I told myself I'd left the farm behind, that it was pragmatic, even merciful. But the land has a way of following you, in dreams, in smells, in the guilt that seeps into your bones like rainwater. I started seeing Dad in everything. In the way the fog hung low, over the hills in the morning, in the distant sound of a train, din belongère, in the soy walk trails. I'd kneel down sometimes, grab a handful of dirt, and squeeze it until it crumbled. It never felt right, too loose, too cold. Not ours. Then, one day, a letter arrived. No return address, just scrawled Sam reading heavy, and he'd been angry while writing. Sat there staring at it for a long time before I opened it. Eli, it began. You probably don't care, but you should know. The mining company pulled out. Says along this not where Trounwad. Tikale dit. The wells are poisoned now. The whole valley's turning sour. The creek where we used to fish. Dead. I tried to warn them, but they didn't listen. I stopped. Reading for a second, my chest tightening. He went on, you think you buried your guilt with the soil you sold, but it's still bleeding through. Everyone's mad. The neighbors, the county board, hell, even June. They say they started when you signed the first deal. Maybe they're right. Maybe not. I don't even know anymore. All I know is we can't go back. None of us can. The letter ended without a signature. I read it 3 times. Then I folded it carefully, like something fragile, and tucked it into my jacket pocket. I didn't move for hours. That night, I dreamed of the farm again, but it wasn't how I remembered. The fields were cracked, the air thick with dust. The oak tree stood alone, half buried, its roots gasping in open air. I saw Sam there, shoveling, his hands raw and blistered. And behind him, Dad watched, silent, his face hidden in shadow. When I tried to speak, the ground opened beneath me, and I fell through layers of earth, each one darker and colder than the last. I woke up shaking, sweat-soaked, the sound of the river outside fading into something like wind over dry land. The next morning, I packed a bag. I told myself I was just going back to see things for what they were, not to fix anything, not to make peace, just to look, to face the ruin I'd made. It took me 8 hours to get there. When I turned onto the old county road, my stomach knotted. The fields were unrecognizable. The topsoil had been gone for months, replaced by red clay pocked with puddles and rusted machinery. The barn was half collapsed. Eoic. Tree still stood, though its leaves were thin, brittle. Sam's truck was there, parked crooked near the house. He was sitting on the porch, nursing a beer. His beard had gone grey around the edges. He didn't stand when I got out of the truck, just squinted at me like I was a ghost he wasn't sure he wanted to see. Well, he said after a while. The prodigal son returns. I'm not here to fight, I said. Then why are you here? I looked out at to see what's left. He chuckled bitterly. Not much. You remember, how did used to say the land was? I leave? Guess we found out what happens when you kill something that breathes. I didn't mean for it to end like this, I said. Yeah, well, that's what everyone says before they ruin something. We sat in silence for a while. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of oil and wet clay. Somewhere, in the distance, a pump creaked, still draining what was left of the groundwater. After a while, Sam spoke. Again, quieter this time. I think about him every day, you know, Dad, the way he used to walk these fields before dawn, checking the rows by lantern light. He'd whistle that same damn tune, Amazing Grace. Remember? I nodded. Yeah, he used to say the land liked it. Sam laughed once, sharp and short. Maybe that's why it died. Nobody sang to it anymore. We both stared at the horizon. Her sky was bleeding orange and violet. For a second, I thought I saw something move in the distance, a shimmer. A trick of the light, like the land was breathing again, trying to remember what it felt like to be alive. I donated the money. I said quietly. Master Feet. Food Program, Rainwater Initiatives. I thought it might balance things. Sam turned to me, his expression unreadable. You think money balances anything? I didn't answer. Because he was right. He sighed, rubbed his face. You should talk to June. She's been asking about you. She hates me. Yeah, he said. But she still asks. I looked at the house, the peeling paint, the broken shutters, the porch swing creaking in the wind. You staying for now, he said. Someone to watch it die. The sun dipped below the ridge, and the shadows stretched long across what used to be our field. I could feel the chill setting in. I turned to leave, but Sam's voice stopped me. Eli, I looked back. You ever think maybe we weren't meant to own this land? Maybe it owned ***. I didn't have an answer for that either. As I drove away, I caught one last glimpse of the farm in the rearview mirror. The dying oak, the scarred earth, the house that used to be our world. The sky glowed like it cooled then between morning. And for the first time, I wondered if selling the soil wasn't the end of the story at all, but the beginning of something worse. Something that would outlive us all. 3 months passed before I heard from June again. Her voice came through the phone brittle and low, like it had traveled a long distance not just through wires, but through grief itself. Eli, she said, you should come back. Sam's in the hospital. Those words hit harder than I'd expected. For a second, I didn't even breathe. What happened? I asked. Collapsed at the farm. She said, heat stroke, maybe, but the doctors say it's worse. His lungs, they think. It's the dust. All that mining, the clay, the chemicals, it's been in the air for months. I gripped the phone tighter. Is he alive? She said quickly. Barely, but you need to see him. I drove through the night. The road was half familiar, half forbidding, lined with silhouettes of dead trees and sagging fences. When I reached Ashe County, the air itself seemed different, heavy, metallic. The rain had stopped weeks ago, June told me later. The earth was choking under its own dust. At the hospital, I found Sam asleep or maybe unconscious. His face was gaunt, his skin pale under a film of red clay dust that clung even to the edges of his hair. Machines hummed beside him, their rhythm steady but weak. June was sitting in the corner, her eyes rimmed red. She didn't look up when I entered. "You came," she said quietly. I had to. She stood, crossing her arms. "You didn't have asterisk to do anything before, not when it mattered. I took the blow." I know. She looked at me for a long time, as if searching for something she couldn't find. Envy. Stopped working the land even after they left. Said he wanted to make it right again. Spent hours out there digging trenches, trying to water crops that wouldn't grow. I looked at Sam, his chest rising and falling under the thin hospital blanket. He blamed me. He blamed himself, June said softly. But he didn't know how to say it. We fell into silence. The air smelled like disinfectant and stale coffee. Outside, thunder rumbled distantly, the first sign of rain in weeks. When Sam finally woke, his eyes fluttered open like he'd just come back from somewhere far away. He saw me and tried to smile. "Didn't think you'd show," he rasped. "Wouldn't miss it," I said. He chuckled weakly, then coughed a dry, hacking sound. That made June flinch. "Farm's dying faster than me," he muttered. "Don't say that," June whispered. He ignored her. "You remember the south field, Eli? The one where the soil stayed dark after every rain. Yeah, I dug there last week. Found something." I frowned. "Found what?" He hesitated, his voice dropping. "A well, old one. Must have been there before. Dat is tarstim." It was covered over, but the water's still clean. June looked up, startled. "Clean? How do you know?" "I tasted it," Sam said. "Sweetest damn water I've ever had. Colder, clear. Like the earth, still remembers what it's supposed to be." He leaned his head back, eyes closing again. "Promise me you'll find it," he said. "Keep it alive. If there's anything." "Ortsaving ans grad." I promise. Those were the last words he ever spoke to me. He died 2 days later. The funeral was small, just me, June, a few old neighbors, and the pastor who used to bless our harvest every spring. The ground was so dry the shovel clanged against it, like stone. The air was thick with the smell of dust and rain that wouldn't fall. After the service, June and I stood by the oak. It had lost most of its leaves, its bark cracked like old leather. "He told you about the well?" she asked. "Yeah," she stared out at the field. "Do you think it's real?" "I don't know," I said. "But I'm going to find it." She nodded, brushing her hair from her face. "If you do, maybe don't tell anyone. Let something stay ours." That night, I stayed in the farmhouse for the first time in years. The roof leaked and the wind moaned through broken windows. I lay awake, listening to the old boards creak, half expecting to hear Dad's boots on the porch or Sam's voice calling from the field. Just before dawn, I grabbed a lantern and walked to the south field. The air was cool, thick with the scent of clay and decay. I found the trench. Sam had dug narrow, rough, marked with the remnants of his boot prints. After an hour of digging, my shovel struck something hollow. I cleared the dirt away and uncovered the edge of an old wooden cover, splintered and sun-bleached. My heart pounded as I pried it loose. Beneath, it was a narrow shaft lined with stones descending into darkness. I dropped the lantern beam. Inside, and there it was, the glint of water, still and deep, maybe 20 feet down. I climbed down, slowly, the rocks slick under my boots. The air was cool, damp, alive. When I reached the bottom, I knelt and cupped the water in my hands. It was cold as memory. I drank, and for the first time in years, the land didn't taste like dust. I stayed there for a long while, feeling the quiet thrum beneath my feet. The ground wasn't dead, not completely. Something had survived. When I climbed back out, the first light of morning was breaking over the hills. The clouds were thick, bruised, heavy with rain. I stood there, watching as the first drop hit the earth, then another, and another until the whole sky opened up. Zeland. Drank greedily. The scent of wet soil rose, rich and alive, like the ghost of what used to be. Maybe this was what Sam had meant. Maybe the land didn't need ownership or legacy or memory, it just needed to be left alone long enough to heal. I walked back toward the house, soaked, trembling, but lighter somehow. For the first time since I'd sold the soil, I felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness, not yet, but maybe as around in 3 days. It came down in sheets, relentless and purifying, washing the dust from the windows and the guilt from the air. By night, Jesucricade started to flow again, a thin, silvery thread winding through what used to be the north field. I stood on the porch and watched it swell, remembering how it once curled behind the barn, where Sam and I would skip stones when the work was done. It was tranche de same ruse to round our harvest now, felt like a blessing. On the morning of the 4th day, the clou broke, and with a rare, clean scent that only comes after too much has been burned away. I took the old shovel from the barn, the one Dad used to call his Sunday spade, the one he refused to replace even after the handle splintered, and went back to the south field. The well had filled higher. Water glistened in the sunlight, rising almost to the rim. The ground around it had darkened, soft and spongy, like the land itself was remembering how to breathe. June came up behind me, her boots squelching in the mud. You really found it, she said quietly. Sam was right, I said, not turning. She crouched beside me, peering into the water. It's beautiful. It looks alive. It is alive. She smiled faintly, but there was something haunted in her eyes. You think this means something, that it can come back. I wanted to say yes. I wanted to believe it. But I'd learned that the earth keeps its own secrets. It forgives on its own terms, if it forgives at all. Maybe, I said. Even it doesn't. At least remembers. We sat there for a while. Read me dreep. Of water echoing from somewhere deep below. It was almost like a heartbeat. When we finally stood, June brushed her hands on her jeans and looked toward the ridge where Dad's ashes had been scattered. You know, she said, I used to think selling the land was the worst thing you could have done. I turned to her. Oh, no. She looked out at the horizon, her expression unreadable. Now I think maybe it was the only way to save it that caught me off guard. Save it? You stripped it down to its bones, she said. Took away everything we'd built, all the fences, the fields, the things we thought made it ours. And now look at it. It's starting over. Maybe that's what it needed. To be free of us. I didn't have a reply. The truth was too heavy, too close. That night, I stayed up by the window, watching the stars. For the first time in years, the air was clear enough to see them all. Hundreds, thousands of them, scattered like spilled seed across the sky. I thought about Dad again. About the way he used to kneel before planting season, pressing his palm to the soil and whispering something I never caught. I used to think it was superstition, a prayer to the land. But maybe it was something else, a kind of apology. In the morning, I went to the barn. The roof sagged, but the tools were still there, rusted and forgotten. I picked up the old hoe, ran my hand over the worn wooden grip. And for reasons I can't explain, I walked out into the south field and began to turn the earth. The first few strokes were rough. The clay resisted, clinging to the blade. But after, while the soil began to loosen, dark and damp beneath the surface, worms moved there, sluggish but alive. It wasn't much, but it was something. By noon, June came out with a basket of seeds she'd found in the pantry, old ones. Sealed tight in mason jars and labeled in Dad's faded handwriting. Asterisk corn, beans, sunflower. Asterisk, you think they're still good? She asked. I took one jar, elle dit topsoil. Light. The seeds looked small, fragile, like dust waiting for a reason to rise. Only one way to find out. So we planted them, not across the whole field, just a small patch near the well. We worked in silence, the kind of silence that felt shared instead of empty. When we done, Westubak had in mud and sweat. It didn't look like much, just a scarred patch of ground dotted with shallow furrows. But to me, it was the most beautiful thing I'd seen in years. Dad would have laughed at us, June said. Yeah, I said, smiling faintly. And then he would have helped. The next few weeks passed quietly. The rain came and went, gentle this time, not violent. The well stayed clear, and small shoots began to push through the soil, pale and trembling at first, then greener, stronger. I started sleeping again, dreaming again. Sometimes I saw Sam in those dreams, standing by the oak, his hands in his pocket, watching the fields without saying a word. One morning, I found a sunflower had bloomed, just one, tall and defiant, its face turned toward the rising sun. I stood there for a long time, staring at it, and for the first time in years, I cried. Not out of guilt, or anger, or loss, but something else. Something quieter. June came up beside me. You think he'd be proud? She asked softly. I wiped my eyes. Maybe, but I think that's not the point anymore. She tilted her head. Then what is? That it's alive, I said. That something still grows here, as we stood. There, a soft breeze moved through the field, carrying the scent of wet soil and new life. The oak tree, still scarred but standing, rustled its few remaining leaves like a whisper. And in that sound, I swear I heard Dad's voice again, angry, not disappointed, just asterisk there dot asterisk it said nothing. But I understood anyway. The land had forgiven us. Or maybe, finally, we had forgiven. Ourselves. Summer arrived quietly, like it was afraid to disturb what little peace the land had finally found. The fields shimmered under the sun again, not the endless green of the old days, but patches of tender life scattered across clay that had learned to breathe. The corn grew slow and uneven, the beans tangled in defiance, the sunflowers stood proud like sentinels. Every morning, I'd walk the rows barefoot, feeling the earth's pulse under my feet, the same way Dad used to. Sometimes June joined me, sometimes not. She tinha journal les penis, qu'est beat off ma'am. She said she wanted to record the healing, though we both knew she was really trying to hold on to what time always steals first, meaning we didn't talk much about Sam, but he was there in everything. In the way the wind leaned across the fields, in the rhythm of our steps as we worked, in the faint smell of tobacco that sometimes drifted near the oak even though neither of us smoked. By late July, the well's water had begun to draw attention. A hiker found it, took a photo, post online with a cash cow wheat and a week. People started showing up, environmentalists, journalists, a handful of locals who still believed in omens. One afternoon, a white SUV rolled up the old driveway. Out stepped a man in a pressed shirt and mirrored sunglasses, the kind of person whose shoes never touched mud unless there was money in it. You must be Elijah Carter, he said, offering a hand. Eli, I corrected, not taking it. Who are you? Name's Beckwith. I represent a research foundation. We've been tracking reports of unusual water sources across post-mined regions. Word is, yours might be. One of the purest samples in the state. June came out onto the porch, crossing her arms. And why would that matter to you? Beckwith's my led smoothly. Purity, Miss Carter, it's valuable. Your land could be at the center of something much bigger, eco-restoration grants, public partnerships. You could turn this place into a legacy. I felt my stomach twist at that word. Legacy. We'd already destroyed one, trying to preserve another. No, I said flatly. We're not selling, leasing, or branding anything. The well stays as it is. He chuckled lightly. You misunderstand. We're not interested in ownership, just cooperation. Think about it. Ashe County could become a model for soil rehabilitation. A redemption story, if you will. June's voice was sharp. Redemption for who? Beckwith hesitated, adjusting his sunglasses. Everyone, he said finally. For what was lost. I looked at him for a long time. Then at the land behind me, the trembling stalks, the weak but persistent green, the fragile heartbeat we'd barely coaxed back. Première réalisée date. What he was offering wasn't restoration. It was resurrection, for sale. We're done selling pieces of this place, I said. He sighed, stepping back toward his SUV. It's your decision. But if you change your mind, there's a grant proposal waiting on my desk. He left a business card wedged into the porch rail. I didn't look at it after he drove off. June exhaled hard. You think? He'll be back, maybe, I said. But next time, he won't find us waiting. That evening, I walked out to the oak. The sky was streaked in gold and violet, and for a moment, the air smelled like it used to. Before the mines, before the fights, before everything broke, I sat at the base of the tree, ran my fingers through the grass and felt something hard. Beneath the soil, I dug a little and uncovered a small wooden box, its hinges rusted, but still holding. I hadn't seen it in years. Dad used to keep seeds in it, the sacred ones he called them, varieties he'd saved from his father's crops, untouched by chemicals, meant for a day of rebirth. Inside were only a few handfuls left, heirloom corn, squash beans all wrapped in faded cloth. Beneath them lay a folded note in Dad's handwriting. The paper was yellowed, the ink smudged, but the words were still legible. If you're reading this, then the land has gone quiet. Don't beg it for forgiveness, don't demand it to yield. Plant what remembers you. I don't know how long I sat there reading those lines over and over. When I finally stood, I felt the strange mix of grief and calm that only comes when something long dead starts whispering again. That night June and I planted. Sacred Teleminin, Preo speak. We just worked in silence under a sky full of stars, our hands sinking deep into the forgiving earth. Weeks past, the new shoots came up strong, defying the odds. Their leaves were darker, glossier than anything we'd planted before, and when the wind moved through them, they made a sound like distant rain, soft, steady, eternal. One morning, a group of children from the nearest town wandered onto the property. They'd heard about the magic well, but what caught their attention wasn't the water. It was the field, the air there shimmered with heat, and the smell of life was thick, sweet, intoxicating. A little girl pointed at the tallest sunflower and asked, "Did you make this grow?" I knelt beside her, brushing a handful of soil through my fingers. "No." I said, "It decided to grow." She smiled like she understood that night as the sun bled out over the horizon, June, and I sat on the porch, quiet and tired in a good way. The sound of frogs had returned too. The creek, fireflies blinked in the tall grass. "The world felt for once unbroken, you know," she said, leaning back. "I think maybe Dad's last harvest wasn't the crops." "What do you mean?" She looked out at the fields where the new plants swayed like waves. "Maybe it was us. Maybe he planted us here to see if we'd ever grow after the fire. I thought along the soil we'd estripedond. The water we'd found, about Sam's hands in the dirt, about the ghosts that had stopped haunting us. Because they didn't need to anymore." The moon rose and the land glowed silver, the well, the crops, the oak, all bound together in the same quiet breath. I leaned back, eyes closed, and whispered into the night, "We're still here, Dad, and so's the land, and somewhere in the dark deep, beneath the roots and clay, I swear I felt the earth answer, not in words, but in the smallest tremor of life, steady as a heartbeat, not an ending, just a beginning." Finally earned the morning after that whispering rain of fireflies, something changed, subtle, at first, the way all miracles begin. The air had that strange density, again the same kind that came before storms or revelations. When I stepped onto the porch, the world was wrapped in a soft grey mist that blurred the line between earth and sky. The fields looked endless, half-burned from the fog, each plant beaded with dew that shimmered like tiny mirrors. I walked out barefoot, the boards creaking behind me. The ground was cool beneath my feet, alive and humming somewhere beneath the layers of clay and silt. Something had begun to pulse. It wasn't the hum of machines, not anymore. It was slower, older. A heartbeat. June joined me a few minutes later, her hair tied back, her expression unreadable. "You feel it too?" she asked. I nodded. The ground's breathing. She knelt, pressing her palm flat to the earth. Her eyes widened slightly. "It's warm." The soil was warm, not hot like sunbaked clay, but gently alive like a creature stirring after a long sleep. We didn't know what it meant, not then, but we felt something beginning. Later that day we took samples of the water from the well, not for Beckwith's foundation, not for data or profit. We just wanted to know if the land's healing had spread below the surface. June brought out the old testing kit from her days in the city lab, something she hadn't touched since before Dad's death. The pH was perfect. The mineral levels balanced. The water was pure, richer even than before the mining. "It's like it's cleaning itself," she said, astonished. Rebuilding from underneath, I stared down into the well, at the reflection of the sky rippling on the surface. "Maybe Sam was right," I said. "Maybe the earth remembers." That night we lit a small fire by the oak, not out of ritual or mourning this time, but as a kind of vigil, a thank you. The wind was gentle, carrying the scent of wildflowers that hadn't bloomed here in years. "I think it's forgiving us." Je ne sais softly murmur look at that moving oak. "And what about you, Eli? You ever think of moving on?" I stared into the flames for a long time before answering. I thought leaving would save me, then I thought staying would, but I think the only thing worth doing is listening to whatever's still alive. The fire crackled in agreement. Over the next few months, people stopped coming. The rumor of miracle soil faded as quickly as it had spread. The ones who stayed nearby learned to respect the land again, to walk softly, to take only what it offered. June started hosting small gatherings by the well, teaching local kids how to plant seeds, how to feel the pulse beneath the dirt. And me, I built a small bench under the oak. I'd sit there at dusk with a notebook, writing down everything I remembered about the farm, Dad's songs, Sam's stubborn laugh, June's bright defiance. I wrote it all down so the land would have witnesses. One evening, as I sat there scribbling, the wind. Reçu dans lit. The grass rippled like an ocean, and a low rumble moved through the ground, not a quake, not thunder. It was steady, rhythmic, alive. The well began to shimmer, with faint light, the water glowing softly from within. I froze, my pen hovering midair. June! I called. She came running, breathless, her eyes wide when she saw it. What's happening? I don't know, I whispered. The light grew brighter, spreading through the cracks in the soil, tracing faint lines that ran through the entire field like veins of fire. The plant seemed to sway toward it, every leaf trembling, and then, just as suddenly, it stopped. The light faded, the ground stilled. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The air felt electric, but calm. Then June laughed. Quietly, the sound full of awe. It's alive, she said. It's really alive. I smiled, though my throat tightened with something between joy and sorrow. Guess we finally kept it alive. After all, the next morning. The fields were different again. Greener, fuller. The crops had grown inches overnight, and a soft carpet of wildflowers had sprouted along the creek. The air buzzed with bees and dragonflies, the first I'd seen in years. That day marked something unspoken between us, the end of mourning and the start of belonging. Not ownership, not control, but kinship. We stopped calling it the farm. It didn't feel right anymore. Instead, we called it the land, like it had a name older than our family, older than our grief. By the end of the season, the fields were thriving. The corn stood tall, the beans twined around their poles like muscle and memory. The sunflowers had multiplied, golden faces following the light across the sky. One evening, a light rain fell as the sun set, not heavy, just a whisper on the leaves. I walked out into it and looked toward the horizon, where the mist met the ridge. For the first time, I saw the land as Dad must have, not as a thing to be owned or fought over, but as something to be in conversation with. Something meurt everything. What happens now? She asked. I looked at her, then at the fields, at the distant oak, at the well that glowed faintly under the grey light. Now, I said quietly, we let it tell the next story. She smiled. Without us. With us. Butistim we sensed the rain grew them softly, not angry, not warning, just alive. We stood there until the world around us blurred, our silhouettes swallowed by water and light. And in that moment, I knew the truth. The land had never belonged to us. We had belonged to it all along. It had let us wound it, strip it, betray it, and still, somehow, it let us come home. And maybe that's all forgiveness really is. A return to where life first began, hands in the soil, hearts unarmed, listening. Autumn came quietly, the way forgiveness does without ceremony, without anyone noticing exactly when it began. One day the air was heavy and green, and the next it was gold, soft around the edges. The hilus lutes gripped the soil en datin veille. Of mist clung to the mornings like breath on glass. The fields were alive again, more alive than I had ever seen them. Even in the years when Dad walked among them, humming hymns to the corn. The plamp, Kaim's Treng, as though the mem what it was supposed to doing all along. The well still shimmered at dawn. Sometimes, when the sun hit it just right, the water sent a small column of light straight upward, piercing the fog. Junkaledi the spine of them wrong. Everything seemed to grow outward from that. Point now, as if life itself had chosen that spot to start again. We didn't talk about selling anymore, or legacy, or money. None of that belonged here. People stopped visiting too. The stories faded into rumor, and rumor into silence. The quiet that settled was not the silence of ruin, it was the silence of peace. Then, in late October, we got our first frost. It came overnight, unannounced, dusting the edges of leaves with silver. When I stepped outside that morning, the land looked both ancient and newborn. The air was sharp, every sound clear enough to touch. June was already up, standing by the well, her hands in her pockets. It's cold, she said, her breath curling like smoke. Winter's early this year. She smiled faintly. Maybe it's just coming home, like everything else. We stood there for a while, watching the frost melt as the sun climbed. The water in the well steamed gently. I noticed a new patch of green near the ochre carpet of shoots I didn't remember planting. When I knelt to look, I saw that they weren't crops at all. Wildflowers, dozens of them, tiny, pale blue blossoms pushing through the clay. Première brochette. The soil around them, and the scent that rose was sweet and clean like rain and ashen memory, all at once. Those weren't there yesterday, I said. June crouched beside me. Maybe Dad left them. I laughed quietly. You don't even believe in that kind of thing. She didn't answer, just smiled. Doesn't mean it's not true. Over the next few days, more flowers bloomed. They spread like slow fire through the field blue, white, yellow, wild and unorganized, like the land had decided to decorate itself. The bees came back, then the birds. Then, one morning, I saw a fox trotting along the ridge, tail high, pausing to look toward the house before slipping into the grass. That was when I realized the truth. It wasn't just healing, it was Astris thriving. Astris, the land, had stopped being a monument to our failures. It had become a living thing again. One night, I dreamed of Dad. He was sitting at the kitchen table, the old oil lamp glowing between us. His hands were calloused, his nails black with soil. He looked younger than when he died, eyes bright, voice steady. You did good, boy, he said. I sold it, I whispered. I ruined everything. He shook his head slowly. No, you gave it back. When I woke, the first light of dawn was spilling through the window. For a moment, I wasn't sure if I'd been dreaming at all, because the air inside the house smelled like tilled soil, rich and alive. That day, June packed her bags. Not to leave forever, just to visit her family in Raleigh, she said. I'll be back in the spring, she promised. You'll keep it alive till then? I'll try, I said. Sugar the cat carries inside it. Don't try, she said. Listen, when she drove away, the road swallowed the sound of her tires. I stood by the oak until the dust settled. The land was mine again, not by law, but by solitude. Winter came fast after that. The mornings were pale and quiet, the nights sharp and blue. I spent most of my days tending to the well, mending fences and writing. The words came easier now. They weren't stories anymore, they were observations, whispers caught between rain and wind. Sometimes, when the sun went down, I'd light a small fire and read aloud what I'd written, as though someone might be listening. And maybe someone was. Then, one night in late December, I heard the sound of rain on the roof, slow and steady. It had been weeks since Annie had fallen. I stepped onto the porch and looked up. The air shimmered faintly. But it wasn't rain, it was something softer, finer, ash. I reached out a hand, and the flakes dissolved on my skin. They weren't cold. They were warm, and when I looked down, I saw that where they landed, the ground darkened, damp and fertile. The land was feeding itself. A low rumble moved beneath me steady, like a heartbeat again. The well glowed faintly in the distance, and I could have sworn the oak's branches swayed, though there was no wind. I don't know how long I stood there, barefoot in the ashfall. Listening. When morning came, the world had changed again. The fields were darker, richer, their frost melted away. The air carried a scent I couldn't name, something between smoke and rebirth. The well was still glowing, faint but steady. Lino van Vrijmer the Afami fled 3 cross this unbeat, Lies others, Salvi Zad. All of that. Not ghosts, not exactly. Just echoes, caught in the memory of water. You kept it alive, Sam's voice whispered. Not me, I said aloud. We all did. The reflection shimmered once and disappeared. Now, when I walk the land, I feel it. Breathing with me slow, patient, endless. It doesn't speak in words, but in rhythm, the rustle of grass, the hum of water, the distant whisper of wind through the oak. It doesn't belong to me. It never did, but I belong to it. And that, I think, is the only inheritance that ever mattered. Spring came back like a memory, soft at first, then all at once. The frost melted overnight, and the fields woke up in a rush of green, so sudden it almost hurt to look at. The air buzzed again, bees tracing lazy circles in the sunlight, and the creek sang the way it used to before the trucks. And the drilling and the dust. I'd almost forgotten what true silence sounded like until it came back, not the hollow quiet of ruin, but the kind that hums beneath the noise of living things. The land had healed, not perfectly, not completely. Butanug. The fields were uneven, patches of wild grass mixed with orderly rows of corn and beans. The well still shimmered faintly under the morning light, its water cool and clear, feeding the roots that dared to grow again. And the oak, the old, stubborn oak, had finally bloomed. Not fully, but enough to scatter pale leaves. Across the field, like a benediction, I sat under that tree with my journal open on my lap, writing what would be the last entry I'd ever need to make about this place. June was home again, her laughter drifting through the air from the porch as she taught the neighborhood kids how to plant beans in straight rows. A new generation, learning what we had almost forgotten, that the land listens if you do. I looked out at the horizon, where the mountains met the sky, and for the first time in a long while, I felt something I hadn't dared to feel since before the fighting, before the sale, before all the breaking. Peace, not the kind that please paste your script here. I have understood your commands.